Okay, today is going to be a very light day of reading. Of course, it doesn't really, by the time I finally post this video online, it really won't matter to anybody listening to me, since you can just go straight on to the next video or whatever. As far as I'm concerned today, as I'm sitting here in real time on April 27th, 2022, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm only going to read a chapter and a half today. I'm going to read the first half of 1 Kings 15, 2 Kings 15, as well as 2 Chronicles 26. I am reading the story of King Uzziah of Judah. The next book that we're going to be focusing on is Amos, but I figured that it would probably be better to read about the time of Uzziah before we got into Amos, in order to help set the proper context for Amos. So this is going to be about the reign of King Uzziah, who is covered in 1 Kings 15 and 2 Chronicles 26. 2 Chronicles gives us more information about Uzziah than 1 Kings does. 1 Kings chapter 15, starting in verse 1. In the 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Azariah, that's Uzziah, same guy, son of Amaziah, the king of Judah, began to reign. He was 16 years old. Amaziah was the guy who was actually captured by the king of Israel in an ill-fated attempt to fight Israel earlier on. He was captured by him. We don't know exactly when he was released. It was probably, that previous guy had been Jehoash, king of Israel. He captured Amaziah, king of Judah, in battle. We don't know exactly when Amaziah was released. Probably at the time that Jeroboam II became king. Most likely, he released him, but I don't know. At any rate, Amaziah's son, Azariah, or Uzziah, as we call him in 2 Chronicles, became king at age 16, most likely upon his father's capture by Jehoash, king of Israel. So he was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem for 52 years. Very long reign, second longest of all the kings. There will be a guy later on who reigns 55 years. This guy reigns 52. Now, again, the first several years of that reign would have been in conjunction with his father, and he also has an overlapping period of co-regency with his son later on. His son's name is Jotham, and his son is going to be king at the same time that he is later on. So those 52 years, he wasn't sole monarch for all those 52 years. But he became king probably when his father was captured, when he, the boy, Uzziah, was 16. And he will be king for 52 years, until his death. Even though his son will take over as king later on. His mother's name was Jechaliah. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. Amaziah wasn't a great king, as we read more about in 2 Chronicles, but he gets an overall good assessment, probably because he never became an idolater. The key thing that these writers seem to be looking for when it comes to grading the kings is whether or not they turn to idolatry. Those kings who turn to idolatry are condemned. Those kings who didn't are generally praised, even if they had many other failings. Amaziah had plenty of failings. In fact, reading the account of Amaziah in Kings and Chronicles, it's hard to figure out why they even call him a good king, because it seems like he had nothing but failings. The high places, however, were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. That's a lingering problem that they still have. The Lord afflicted the king with leprosy until the day he died, and he lived in a separate house. Jotham, the king's son, had charge of the palace and governed the people of the land. As for all the other events of Azariah's reign and all he did, are they not written in the annals of the kings, in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Azariah rested with his fathers and was buried near them in the city of David, not with them, just near them. in the city of David, and Jotham his son succeeded him as king. We get a lot more information about him in 2 Chronicles, so we're going to turn there now, 2 Chronicles 26, and read a much fuller account of the reign of King Azariah, or Uzziah, as he is called here. So Amaziah, his father, has been captured by Joash, king of Israel, Jehoaz, king of Israel. He is eventually conspired against and killed. 2 Chronicles 26. Excuse me. Then all the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, this would probably be after his father's capture by the king of Israel, and made him king in place of his father Amaziah. He was the one who rebuilt Eloth and restored it to Judah after Amaziah rested with his fathers. That's a port city, so it's important to note that he has recaptured an important port city. Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. His mother's name was Jechaliah. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. He sought God during the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. Which indicates that after Zechariah died, he didn't seek God as much. We saw that before with Joash, the boy king, who was only 7 years old when he became king, and he was fine as long as he had the priest Jehoiada to guide him. This king was also a young man, 16, older than 7, but still only 16, when he became king. And apparently he was fine as long as he had this Zechariah guy to guide him. This is not the Zechariah of Joash. They read about a guy named Zechariah, whom Joash put to death, or had put to death. We'll read about another Zechariah later, who has a book in the Bible named after him later on. It's not that guy either. It's not Zechariah. So he, the king, Uzziah, sought God during the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. As long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success. He went to war against the Philistines and broke down the walls of Gath, Jabneh, and Ashdod. He then rebuilt towns near Ashdod and elsewhere amongst the Philistines. The Philistines had become a problem again. They were subdued in the days of David, but they become an issue again here. And Uzziah subdues them again. God helped him against the Philistines and against the Arabs who lived in Gur-baal, and against the Maonites, which I believe is also another word for the Edomites. The Ammonites brought tribute to Uzziah. So that's all around like the southern and eastern border of Judah. Where Judah has Israel to its north, the Mediterranean Sea to its west, the Philistine area is along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and then Edom and Ammon are to the east, and these Arabs are to the south and east. So he's controlled basically his southern and eastern borders. By subduing all these enemies along the borders, he has secured his borders. The Ammonites brought tribute to Uzziah, and his fame spread as far as the border of Egypt, which is their national boundaries, as established by God way back in the day, because he had become very powerful. Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate, at the valley gate, and at the angle of the wall, and he fortified them. He also built towers in the desert, and dug many cisterns, because he had much livestock in the foothills and the plains. He needed water. He had people working his fields and vineyards in the hills and in the fertile lands. He loved the soil. So he was a farmer. He was an agricultural guy. He liked the produce of the soil. Uzziah had a well-trained army, ready to go out by divisions according to their numbers, as mustered by Jeiel the secretary and Maaseiah the officer under the direction of Hananiah, one of the royal officials. The total number of family leaders over the fighting men was 2,600. Under their command was an army of 307,500 men, trained for war, a powerful force to support the king against his enemies. Uzziah provided shields, spears, helmets, coats of armor, bows, and slingstones for the entire army. In Jerusalem he made machines designed by skillful men for use on the towers and on the corner defenses to shoot arrows and hurl large stones. His fame spread far and wide, for he was greatly helped until he became powerful. Doesn't say who he was helped by, but obviously the unspoken statement there is he was helped by God. Now this is actually kind of important to point out. Here in Uzziah's day, the emphasis is becoming less about sheer numbers, less about just having sheer bodies to send at the enemies, drafting or conscripting every able-bodied man of fighting age and having them go out and fight. And it's becoming more about having a trained professional standing army that knows techniques and battle war and strategies and knows how to fight. They're professional soldiers. Up until now, it really hasn't been the case. Even in the days of David, David was basically a professional soldier. He got to the point where that was all he really did. And he had a standing army around him that were hardcore trained for battle. But up until now, basically, the army had been conscripted. You would have some mercenaries that you would hire. Remember, we had that Amaziah just in the previous chapter trying to hire some mercenaries from the northern kingdom. So you would have, and Jephthah, back in the days of the judges, was basically a mercenary, a leader of a band of outlaws who would just hire themselves out, and eventually he was asked by the leaders of Israel to be one of their judges. So you had this idea of men who would train themselves for combat or things like that and would hire themselves out as professional soldiers. That's always been around. Always been around. But for the most part, when these kings gathered men together to go to war, a lot of times they just took them from their country, their city, maybe if they were city-state kings, and they just needed numbers. They just needed bodies. They just needed male bodies to go out there and fight. But now we're seeing a shift away from having sheer numbers to having a focus on a professionally trained standing army. And we're going to see, we're going to see that Assyria is going to do. In fact, Assyria is kind of the nation that introduced this concept of a trained professional army, and we're going to see that shift happen kind of around the world as we go forward. Anyway, but after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God, and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense, which is something that only the priests could do. Remember, Saul, the first king of Israel, tried to offer his own sacrifices without Samuel, and he was criticized for that. There is a clear division between the king's duties and the priest's duties. Now, in a lot of countries around them, perhaps just about every other country around them, the king was the high priest. In a lot of cases, the king was the high priest. The king was not only the leader of the army, he was also the leader of the religion, or at least the figurehead. That was not the case in Israel. There was a very clear difference, a very clear distinction, and a line, very thick line drawn between the kingly tribe of Judah, started out with Benjamin, and then became Judah, and the priestly tribe of Levi and the sons of Aaron. And those two classes were not to mix. As powerful as the king was, he was not supposed to do the priest's job. Conversely, the priests could not be kings. There is going to be someone who comes along and combines those roles. Jesus Christ will be a king and a high priest. But we're getting to the days of the New Testament now. But in this covenant, under this priesthood, under this covenant, there is a clear difference between the kings and the priests. And as powerful as the kings were, they were not to do the job of the priests. Now, Uzziah probably legitimately thinks he's honoring God here. I don't think Uzziah is doing this intending to be an apostate or a rebel or an idolater or anything like that. I think he genuinely thinks he's offering God an incense, an offering, and genuinely thinks he's honoring God here. But he is mistaken. He is mistaken. Azariah the priest, with 80 other courageous priests of the Lord, followed him in. They confronted him and said, "It is not right for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord. That is for the priests, the descendants of Aaron. who have been consecrated to burn incense. Leave the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful, and you will not be honored by the Lord God. He thought he was going to be honored. He thought he was okay doing this. Uzziah, who had a censer in his hand ready to burn incense, so he already had what he needed right there in his hand, became angry. So they gave him a warning. He had a chance. He went in there legitimately, I believe, in his mind, intending to honor God. He was told by the priest that this is not going to work. God will not be honored by this. You're going to get in trouble here. This is not your job. He could have put his incense down, his censer, excuse me. He could have put his fire pan down and said, okay, that's it, I'm done. You take care of this, Azariah. But he didn't do that. He didn't do that. Uzziah, who had a censer in his hand ready to burn incense, became angry. While he was raging at the priests in their presence before the incense altar in the Lord's temple. So he was apparently shouting at them. He was not happy with them for trying to rebuke him. Leprosy broke out on his forehead, so some sort of mark or sign. It doesn't necessarily mean the disease of leprosy. It's just some sort of skin blemish broke out and was visible on his forehead while he was raging. When Azariah the chief priest and all the other priests looked at him, they saw that he had this skin mark on his forehead. So they hurried him out. They grabbed him and got him out of there. Indeed, he himself was eager to leave, because the Lord had afflicted him. So he knew that, I guess he looked at a reflection of himself in the censer or whatever and saw the mark and knew that he had been afflicted by the Lord. King Uzziah had leprosy until the day he died, where he had that mark on his head. He lived in a separate house. Now, Kings doesn't mention the reason why he was in a separate house. That's how he was afflicted. It doesn't give us the story why. Chronicles does. He lived in a separate house, leprous, and excluded from the temple of the Lord. Jotham, his son, had charge of the palace and governed the people of the land. The other events of Uzziah's reign, from beginning to end, are recorded by the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos. We're going to hear this name in the future. We're not done by any means with this guy Isaiah. Uzziah rested with his fathers and was buried near them in a field for burial that belonged to the kings. So he was buried near them, but he wasn't buried with them. For people said he had leprosy. And Jotham, his son, succeeded him as king. I felt like I had to read the Uzziah section because that context is going to be very important for studying the book of Amos, which we're going to do next.